The protagonist reflects on his life, explaining that it had always been mundane. He mentions that he was born into an ordinary family, living through uneventful days that he thought would continue until his unremarkable end. He admits he once believed nothing extraordinary would ever happen to him. However, he recounts how everything changed. One of his eyes glows faintly as he shares that his transformation began with the discovery of a game called Heroes of Destiny. He mentions seeing a blonde character on the screen and describes how this game allowed him to imagine himself as the master of a virtual world, an owner of destiny. Returning to his small apartment, he expresses his joy at finally being alone. He explains that turning on his PC is all it takes to make him happy, clarifying that it isn't about liking or disliking school. Just that gaming is enough to fulfill him. He shares his preference for single-player games, noting how they let him explore countless possibilities and replay scenarios endlessly, sometimes even breaking the rules with hacks to exceed all limits. He describes the world of these games as existing solely for him, though with a slight hesitation. He admits that this belief has since shifted. He turns on his live stream and notes how his audience interacts with him. One viewer asks incredulously if he's really streaming midweek, while others mock him, suggesting he might be a slacker who skips school. He recalls a small donation from someone called a GJ, noting his gratitude even though the amount was modest. Then, unexpectedly, another viewer named Dia donates a substantial amount, 1,000. The protagonist explains how this leaves him shocked and confused, recounting how the chat exploded with curiosity about this mysterious donor. They speculate wildly, some joking about refunds, until Dia asks him to check his email. He explains that opening his inbox reveals a message from the game's creator, who introduces himself as a longtime viewer and developer. The creator claims to have made a notoriously difficult game that no one managed to finish during its beta testing. He expresses a desire for the protagonist to test it, stating he'd value his opinion. The protagonist reflects on the challenge, admitting to a flicker of excitement at the thought of achieving what others couldn't. The idea of becoming someone special, even through a game, deeply intrigues him. He agrees to install the game, recounting the moment it begins. A narrative introduction explains the premise. The kingdom of Roke was destroyed by Japol in the year 294. And the player must rise from insignificance to become a hero capable of stopping a demon king's resurrection. Upon succeeding, the player is promised any wish they desire. He describes the initial scene, noting the simplistic graphics but remarking that, for a game developed by a single person, it's impressive. After naming his character as Master of the Game, he narrates being transported to a forest within the fictional continent of Ellen. He describes the game's unconventional mechanics, noting its lack of a tutorial. His first encounter is with an old village chief, who comments on his unfamiliarity. The protagonist admits to being taken aback by the absence of traditional dialogue boxes and observes a text box prompting him to type his response. He decides to test the system, typing a demand for the old man's money and threatening the entire village. He recalls his anticipation for the response, only to recount the old man's sudden blow to his head, killing his character instantly. Frustrated but undeterred, he narrates how he tries again, this time feigning a plea for food and drink. The old man, moved by his supposed desperation, leads him to a house and offers him a drink. The protagonist explains how he drinks it, only to discover too late that it's poisoned. He dies once more, still puzzled by the game's peculiar realism. In a moment of ingenuity, he describes unplugging the internet, suspecting that the developer might be controlling the NPCs. However, he recounts how the game glitches without the connection, leading to another inexplicable death. Reflecting on the developer, whose name matches the mysterious donor Dia, he confesses uncertainty about whether it refers to a person or a team. The protagonist concludes his session, noting the late hour, 1:30 a.m., and saving his progress. He expresses fascination with the game's unique mechanics, likening the experience to inhabiting a living, breathing world. As he drifts to sleep, he admits that the game has ignited a desire to prove himself, to become someone extraordinary. Over time, he becomes deeply absorbed in the game, losing track of days and years. 10 years pass in a blur of immersion. The narrative shifts to an office setting, where a colleague addresses Oshiro-san, thanking him for his assistance. Later, she shyly congratulates him on finishing his work and, after hesitating, invites him to dinner. Her suggestion carries hopeful undertones, but Oshiro-san apologizes, stating that he has more pressing matters to attend to. He waves goodbye, leaving her flustered and disappointed, her unspoken hopes dashed yet again. The protagonist reflects on the path his life has taken, marveling at how he achieved what he had always wanted, to feel special. Yet, he admits to himself that his current life is more ordinary than ever. He wonders if choosing to spend time with his coworker might have led to something far more extraordinary. At least in the game, he muses, he had experienced something entirely different. He recalls the vivid characters from the game, Black Prince, Gale Krakow, Cardinal Cicero Labaro, and the witch Celestina Urin. Each with their own unique charm and personality. Their lifelike reactions had felt so real that he sometimes believed they truly existed in another world. Rubbing his eyes, he acknowledges that those days are over. Just as he thinks this, he hears a sound. Glancing at his screen, he notices a message. The message asks if he wants to embark on a new adventure, warning that pressing yes will teleport him to the continent of Ellen, where he would remain until the game was completed. He moves the mouse, feeling a surge of eagerness, and chooses to proceed. The moment he confirms, he is transported to the continent of Ellen. A strange voice greets him as the master of the game. Slowly opening his eyes, he wonders why his chest hurts so much. His breathing feels labored, and the room around him is unfamiliar. An old man with a mustache stands nearby, explaining that he is finally awake. The man remarks that it was thanks to a high-tier potion he had reserved. The protagonist listens, confused, as the man calls him Calix-sama. He tries to ask who the mustachioed man is, his voice tinged with uncertainty. The man introduces himself as Russell and notes that the boy's confusion is understandable. The protagonist realizes Russell is not speaking Japanese, yet he understands every word. Russell apologizes for the lingering chest pain, explaining that it is a side effect of the potion but assures him it will soon pass. He offers further reassurance before stepping out, leaving the protagonist to recover. Time passes, and as the candle in the room burns out, the boy rises from the bed and approaches the mirror. Staring at his reflection, he realizes his body feels entirely different. It dawns on him that he is inhabiting someone else's body. He tries to calm himself, repeating the name he now knows. Calix Shaekin. A system window suddenly appears before him, confirming his new identity. It lists his name, age, and role as a noble with no profession. The details are disheartening. He is battered and broken, at level 8, with a reputation of just 3 stars and a paltry approval rating of 14%. However, the window also reveals he has governing skills in finance, development, and military. The interface looks strikingly similar to the one from the game, and it finally clicks. He has been transported into the world of the game, the famous continent of Ellen. He tries to steady his racing heart, though the frailty of this body doesn't make it easy. After testing the system window again, he notes he is 15 years old and resolves to gather as much information as possible. He recognizes the need to tread carefully. In this world, carelessness could mean death. He learns he belongs to the county of Shaekin, where his last name implies a direct connection to the ruling family. It is a small relief. At least he has status in this unfamiliar world. A sudden knock at the door startles him, and he freezes, unsure how to respond. He wonders what Calix Shaekin would do in such a situation. He mutters the name repeatedly under his breath, trying to steel himself. Outside, a young maid speaks, saying she has brought his medicine. When he finally musters a response, he adopts a dignified tone and tells her to come in. The maid enters, kneeling and offering a steaming cup of tea. Observing her closely, he notes her age and demeanor. She says the tea will help him recover and encourages him to drink it. Suspicious, he asks who she is but catches himself, realizing the question could expose his confusion. The system window identifies her as Layla, a 23-year-old maid with a low reputation and negative approval rating. Strangely, It also notes her affiliation with the Viscount of Hoshiran territory, an odd connection given their location in Shaekin. What truly alarms him, however, is her unusually high combat capability, far beyond that of an ordinary servant. Layla urges him to drink the tea, smiling brightly. He remains wary, certain the tea is poisoned. Feigning clumsiness, he spills the cup, thinking he has cleverly avoided the danger. To his astonishment, Layla reacts with lightning speed, catching the cup midair without spilling a drop. Her agility leaves him unnerved. Slowly, he takes the cup back, careful not to meet her eyes, and places it on the desk, stating he will drink it later. Layla appears unconvinced but sets the tea down and assures him it is safe. As she leaves, he lies back on the bed, avoiding her gaze. He knows he has narrowly avoided the immediate threat but remains troubled by her strange demeanor. Closing his eyes, he begins plotting his next move, knowing he must tread carefully in this perilous new reality. Calix studies the system, curious to learn more about the house Layla is affiliated with. He discovers from his status that he is the son of the Count's first wife, who had passed away. He wonders briefly if there are other children from the second wife, only to find that there is indeed one, a 16-year-old older than him. His thoughts are interrupted when he notices that his stepmother's last name also ends with Hoshiran, the same as Layla's affiliation. He quickly pieces together the implication. The woman must have sent Layla. If Calix, the son of the first wife, were to die, her son would inherit the title of Count. Strangely, the realization excites him. It feels like a new challenge, a test to overcome. He tells Layla that he feels much better and thanks her for her help. Then, he inquires about his stepmother. She responds with visible surprise, explaining that the Countess is very upset over his recent attempt to take his own life. She pleads with him never to do such a thing again. Hearing this, Calix begins to understand why his body is in such poor shape. Judging by the chest pain that still lingers, it seems this boy truly tried to end his life. He assures Layla that he won't attempt anything like that again, and she remarks that the Countess will surely be relieved to hear it. He thanks her again and politely asks her to leave. Her demeanor shifts, however, as she insists that he has yet to take his medicine. A sense of dread creeps over him. He realizes she will not leave until he drinks it, and the problem is clear. She intends to kill him. Refusing the tea might provoke a direct attack, and while he knows the game, his current fragile form as a teenager leaves him at a disadvantage. He considers yelling for help but dismisses the idea, fearing she might silence him before anyone could intervene. Watching her poised to press him further, he reasons that the tea must be poisoned to make his death appear self-inflicted. It is the same poison he recognizes from a pivotal game moment years ago. Layla offers to help him drink the tea if he is struggling, and Calix feels a familiar grim excitement. He recalls one critical lesson from the game. The worst outcomes always come true if one isn't prepared. Realizing he has no choice, he grabs the cup and drinks it in one swift motion. Layla watches impassively as the effects of the poison begin to take hold. He feels his body weaken, and his vision blur. Yet, instead of succumbing to panic, his mind races for a solution. He remembers Russell mentioning high-tier potions earlier and devises a plan. Feigning composure, Calix demands that Layla fetch Russell immediately. When she hesitates, he snaps at her, belittling her as a mere servant unworthy of questioning his orders. She recoils at his harsh words, apologizes, and hurries out of the room. As soon as she leaves, he scrambles to his feet and tries to purge the poison from his body. Despite his efforts, nothing works. The game, as always, refuses to make things easy. Determined, he begins searching through the drawers and cabinets, hoping to find anything that might help. The system warns him that his eyelids are growing heavy, signaling that the poison is taking its toll. He continues his frantic search, throwing books and trinkets aside, until he spots a bottle on the shelves. Crawling toward it, he grabs it and opens it, only to be hit by the rancid smell of spoiled milk. The realization dawns on him. This is no potion, but it might still work. He remembers that in the game, yogurt served as an antidote for this poison. Desperate, He convinces himself that the spoiled milk could qualify. With his vision fading, he drinks the foul liquid and loses consciousness. When he wakes, Russell is standing over him, asking if he is all right. Calix blinks, momentarily unsure if the game has reset or if he has somehow survived. Russell, oblivious to his confusion, scolds him for the state of the room, asking why it is in such disarray and why he was lying on the floor. It becomes clear to Calix that the game hasn't reset. He lived through the ordeal. He feels an overwhelming relief but resolves to avoid such a near-death experience ever again. No matter what challenges lie ahead, he swears to survive. Shifting his focus to Russell, Calix observes the man as a system window appears, revealing his status. It shows that Russell is currently acting as the Count, a temporary position assumed after the previous Count's death and the lack of a designated heir. Calix notes that Russell's role could be valuable. The man's strict and disciplined nature suggests he might be trustworthy, at least more so than others around him. After all, it was Russell who had saved him earlier with the high-tier potion. Calix speaks up, saying he has something important to share with Russell. Though still weak, his determination to navigate this treacherous new life burns stronger than ever. Calix spends some time explaining everything to Russell, laying out his suspicions and recounting the series of events. However, Russell calmly remarks that there is no tangible evidence to support his claims. He then explains that the potion he administered earlier was standard protocol for the Shaekin family, used in such emergencies as part of normal procedure. Russell adds that his duty is to serve the Shaekin heirs equally, regardless of familial conflicts. Calix, growing frustrated, asks if Russell expects him to continue taking such medicine until he dies, leaving the inheritance to others. Russell counters by questioning whether Calix has truly lost his memory. He explains that the Shaekin family is facing severe financial trouble and that the Delilah family's assistance has been critical to their survival. He presses Calix, asking whether he genuinely doesn't remember or is feigning ignorance. Calix realizes that Russell, bound by duty and lacking proof, will not act rashly. At least, Calix concludes, Lady Stella must believe he is already dead. Deciding not to press further, Calix says that it's fine and that they should let the matter rest for now. However, he requests a small favor, and Russell notices something different in the boy's demeanor, as if he is already several steps ahead in his plan. Hours later, in Shaekin Castle, a figure moves stealthily across the rooftops. Pausing briefly, the individual adjusts their face covering and surveys the increased security below. The figure is Layla. She notes the heightened defenses and quickly identifies a hidden tunnel leading into the castle. The next scene finds her inside, cautiously approaching a door without any guards stationed outside. She enters the room and sees a body lying under a sheet. Though uncertain, she assumes Calix must be dead, especially after administering such a potent poison. She retrieves a letter from her pocket, places it on the desk, and uses a seal from the drawer to stamp it. Her mission nearly complete, she prepares to leave. Before she can escape, a sword suddenly presses against her neck. She freezes, instantly recognizing the voice behind her. Though the figure remains silent, she panics, pleading and shouting that it is already too late. Lord Calix is dead, and the Shaekin family now belongs to the Grumbine family. The person behind her is, of course, Russell, who silently observes her frantic attempts to justify herself. Layla turns defiant, questioning whether Russell, as a mere noble, should interfere in matters beyond his station. Her tirade is cut short when Calix rises from the bed, revealing that her plan has gone exactly as he anticipated. Layla is visibly startled, realizing she has been outmaneuvered. When she attempts to escape, Russell intercepts her with a quick strike, knocking her off balance. Despite her efforts to fight back, it becomes clear that the difference in their skill levels is far too great. Calix calmly points out that her actions amount to an attempted assassination of a noble, a crime punishable by death. He gestures toward the desk, noting that her own actions have provided sufficient evidence. A sealed letter implicating her. Layla falters, her defiance giving way to fear. Suddenly, she collapses, leaving Calix momentarily unsure of what has happened. Russell inspects her and discovers a strange orb of mana emanating from her body. He explains that it is likely a mana hole, the result of someone with powerful latent abilities who lacks proper training in mana breathing techniques. Calix listens without much reaction, his demeanor suggesting he was already aware of this possibility. Russell grows curious about how much the boy truly knows, recalling his earlier request. Later, Layla finds herself tied to a chair, her arms restrained. She wakes groggily and immediately notices Calix standing before her. He mentions the poison she had used, describing it as a slow death poison, designed to kill within a few hours. He speculates aloud that if he had died, it would have looked like a suicide, leaving her and her masters in the clear. Grabbing her face, he demands to know why she tried to kill him. Layla tries to feign ignorance, but Calix dismisses her act. He accuses her of lacking true loyalty to Lady Stella, remarking that her actions stem from fear of death rather than devotion. When she remains silent, Calix signals Russell to intervene. Russell pries her mouth open as Calix retrieves a small bottle, pouring its contents into her mouth. Layla recoils at the taste, gagging and struggling against the restraints. As the potion takes effect, she screams, demanding to know what they have done to her. Calix nonchalantly tells her it was just a little poison. He mentions something called Setta's puppet, a toxin with over 3,000 potential antidotes, depending on the formula. Layla grows increasingly terrified, insisting that such a thing is impossible for someone like him to possess. Calix simply replies that with enough money, anything is possible. Layla finally breaks, claiming she will report the assassination as a success to her master if Calix lets her go. However, Calix warns her that defying him would be a fatal mistake. He reveals that the antidote to her poison is known only to him. If she values her life, she will follow his orders. Shaking and breathless, Layla reluctantly agrees, pleading to be untied. Russell hesitates, reminding Calix that she had tried to kill him. Calix, however, insists that she is a valuable witness and must be treated with dignity, though his true intentions remain unclear. Layla trembles, her defiance replaced with fear, as she realizes the precariousness of her situation. Calix remains composed as Layla begs to be released, her voice cracking with desperation. Tears threaten to spill as she pleads for freedom, her distress palpable. Time passes before she finally announces that she will report the assassination as a success and abruptly leaves the room. Calix watches her departure, understanding that the next challenge lies ahead. Someone else, someone with the power to control all the knights, will soon become his obstacle. His gaze shifts to Russell, who stands beside him. Russell breaks the silence by demanding to know how Calix has come by such extraordinary knowledge. Calix hesitates, initially tempted to claim he learned it from books, but quickly realizes that excuse would sound absurd. Russell warns him that such an explanation could amount to signing his own death sentence. Cornered, Calix devises another story and cautiously proceeds. He asks Russell if he remembers the dagger he had plunged into his chest. Russell confirms that he does but presses him on why it matters now. Calix explains that the dagger was an heirloom from his mother, who had once claimed it held mysterious powers. He insists those powers seem to have awakened within him. Though Russell remains skeptical, Calix continues, stating that he never imagined the secret to unlocking such abilities was stabbing himself in the heart. Russell challenges him, saying that if the dagger truly were so rare, it would be widely known. Calix pauses, then asks if Russell has ever heard of the Dagger of Claire. Russell's expression changes as recognition dawns. He questions whether the previous lady's dagger could really be that legendary artifact. If so, it might explain Calix's newfound knowledge. But Russell points out one critical concern: whether anyone else knows about this. Calix assures him that no one does, emphasizing that Russell is the first to hear of it. Shifting the conversation, he asks what Russell thought about Layla's claims, particularly the notion that Count Claire's movements, his father's movements, had been leaked. Calix says it is preposterous to believe that a knight as skilled as his father could fall to a mere monster attack. He hints that his father's death might have been premeditated. Russell quickly realizes that Calix is seeking his help, though the veteran soldier hesitates. He has spent 50 years avoiding political entanglements, a principle that has defined his life. But Calix's accusation, that someone stood to benefit from his father's death, begins to weigh on him. Calix suddenly shouts, his voice filled with anger and pain, demanding to know why his father had to die. He insists he only wants to uncover the truth and plan his revenge against those responsible. He asks Russell if a true knight could serve a family that orchestrated such betrayal. Russell freezes, visibly torn, before finally kneeling and swearing loyalty to Calix. Though thrilled, Calix notices the weight of Russell's decision. By doing this, the older man has forsaken a lifetime of neutrality. Still, Calix feels triumphant. Russell promises to ensure his growth and strength, but Calix quickly changes the subject to avoid discussing any potential training. Instead, he focuses on the Countess's poisoning attempt, declaring that everything is falling into place for their revenge. Russell asks how he can assist, but before Calix can answer, the scene shifts. In Shaekin Castle, a group gathers around an enormous table. A blonde woman with a fan comments that everyone has arrived. Whispers circulate as some question why the Countess is seated on the throne. The Countess addresses the assembly, mentioning the events of the previous day. She announces that Prince Calix attempted to take his own life using the slow death poison. One of the older men remarks that it is a common choice for such acts and that survival is impossible once consumed. The Countess expresses satisfaction with Calix's supposed demise, declaring his faction irrelevant. She confidently asserts that her son, Grumbine, will inherit the title. The room murmurs in agreement, with some suggesting she take charge temporarily. In a nearby room, Calix dons his armor, remarking how interesting the situation has become. He calls for Russell, who affirms his loyalty, ready to follow him to the end. Fully armored, Calix prepares for what lies ahead. He reflects that Grumbine is nothing more than a pampered child, a mere pawn in his mother's schemes. As the assembly continues, the doors burst open. Calix strides in, with Russell at his side. The room falls silent, stunned by his appearance. The Countess is visibly shaken, struggling to comprehend how he is still alive. The assembly erupts in whispers, while Calix marches directly to the Countess. He addresses her by name, declaring that the throne she occupies does not belong to her. The Countess attempts to recover, asking with feigned concern how he is feeling. Calix smiles, explaining that he survived the poison and warns her that she acted far too hastily. The Countess accuses him of making baseless claims and insists that calling her an assassin is unacceptable. Calix counters, accusing her of dishonesty despite being exposed. The room grows tense as the Duchess, unsure of his next move, asks what he is planning. Calix claps his hands, signaling someone to enter. Layla walks in, and Calix introduces her as a witness. The room watches, confused, while the Countess visibly panics. Layla kneels as Calix commands her to speak. She introduces herself as a shadow operative from the Harem family's Special Operations Unit, explaining that she was trained as a child in the Gorda Fields and sent to infiltrate Shaekin Castle under Lady Stella's orders. Calix presses her, asking if she was aware of her mission. Layla admits that she knew, her voice faltering. The Countess's composure crumbles as Calix's trap begins to unfold. The Duchess erupts in anger, declaring that everything being presented is nothing more than a baseless conspiracy. Some of the nobles rally to her side, pointing out that Layla had served in the castle for 5 years. They question how someone so embedded in the household could possibly be a spy. Accusations begin flying, with some accusing the Harem family of scheming, while others note that Layla wouldn't confess without a reason. The tension in the room builds as the treasurer near the Duchess grows visibly nervous, his voice shaking as he demands an explanation from Russell. Russell, calm and unshaken, states that Layla is not a maid but a criminal caught in the act. He explains that her confession as a spy working for the Harem family was coerced after she was caught planting evidence. Whether this is truly a conspiracy or not, he asserts, can only be determined by hearing her full testimony. Another noble interrupts, urging the treasurer to let Layla speak, silencing the rising protests. The room falls quiet, though the Duchess's fury is palpable. Someone finally asks Layla to clarify her mission while serving the Harem family. She replies that her primary task was to gather intelligence. Calix presses her for specifics, and she reveals that her duties included tracking the territory's income and expenses, noting the travel details of the former count, and monitoring the movements of political allies and vassals. Calix steps forward, his expression cold, and asks her to state her most recent orders. Layla hesitates but admits that her latest mission was to poison Prince Calix with slow death venom. She explains that after his death, she was instructed to leave a forged suicide note in his room to make it appear as though he had taken his own life. When asked about the outcome, she acknowledges that while she successfully poisoned him, she was caught by Russell before she could plant the note. The Duchess screams for Layla's immediate arrest, and guards move to seize her. Layla resists, crying out that there is no evidence to support the accusations. Calix remains composed and signals to Russell, who steps forward holding the forged note. Russell explains that he had been in Calix's room when Layla entered to plant the letter. He then mentions the Earth Scroll, a magical artifact capable of revealing malicious intent, which could be used to uncover who gave Layla her orders. The treasurer pales at this revelation, realizing the consequences of the scroll's use. Panic sets in as he contemplates desperate measures to suppress the truth. Calix, observing the treasurer's unease, smirks knowingly and calls for the knights. The sound of marching boots fills the hall as soldiers file in, surrounding each noble present. There is no longer any way to hide the truth. Terrified, the treasurer demands an explanation. Russell states that the results of the Earth Scroll were shocking and, to prevent chaos, the knights were summoned to ensure order. The nobles protest, claiming that bringing soldiers into the sacred Great Hall is a violation of tradition. Meanwhile, Grumbine, seated beside the Duchess, appears stunned and clueless. The Duchess, realizing that the knight's presence means the evidence is irrefutable, begins to unravel. Calix asks Russell what the punishment is for a noble who attempts to assassinate a family member. Russell replies that the crime is punishable by death. Desperate, the Duchess grabs her son, Grumbine, and insists he had no part in the scheme. Turning to Calix, she pleads with him, calling herself his mother despite their lack of blood relation. She begs him to show mercy, but Calix coldly directs his gaze to Layla, asking if the Duchess's claims are true. Layla, trembling, reveals that when she received her orders from the Countess, Grumbine was present. Calix smirks, acknowledging the lie but stating that he doesn't care. His only goal is to take them both down. He declares that the hunt has reached its climax, leaving the Duchess in stunned silence. Suddenly, Grumbine rises from his seat, crossing the room to kneel before Calix. The act shocks everyone. He bows deeply, his voice quivering as he pleads for Calix to spare his mother. The Duchess panics, screaming at her son to return to his seat. The nobles murmur in disbelief, but it is clear Grumbine is willing to sacrifice himself. Calix places a hand on Grumbine's shoulder, telling him that if he truly cares for his mother, there is a way. Grumbine looks up, hopeful, and Calix offers a deal. If Grumbine confesses his involvement, he will request a reduced punishment for the Duchess. However, Calix warns him to think carefully about his decision. Grumbine hesitates, torn, while the Duchess orders Calix to stop pressuring her son. Other nobles accuse her of masterminding Calix's assassination attempt, adding to the chaos. Grumbine, overwhelmed, admits his involvement. Calix, having anticipated this outcome, declares that Grumbine's confession will save the family name. However, as punishment, Grumbine must permanently seal his mana. The room gasps at the severity of the punishment. Sealing one's mana is a fate worse than death for a noble, akin to losing one's identity and social standing. Grumbine, realizing he has no choice, agrees. Russell hands him a scroll, instructing him to press it to his chest. A golden circle forms, and Grumbine's mana begins to dissipate, vanishing completely. The Duchess collapses, defeated, while Grumbine kneels beside her, trying to console her. She wails, lamenting the loss of her son's future and cursing Calix. Grumbine, however, tries to find solace in the fact that he saved her life. Calix, watching from a distance, feels no sympathy. He reminds himself that this is a game, and there is no room for guilt or hesitation. Russell watches silently, his expression unreadable, as Calix composes himself for the next step. There is no turning back now, and Calix orders Russell to proceed with the remaining tasks. It is announced that Lady Stella and Prince Grumbine will be confined to an annex, prohibited from any contact with the outside world. The mother and son are escorted out, their heads lowered in resignation. Calix observes their departure intently, his gaze cold and calculating. Turning to the treasurer, Calix accuses him of leaking critical documents. The treasurer, panicked, attempts to defend himself, claiming that his circumstances are unique. His protests are cut short when a soldier, tired of his rambling, lands a punch squarely in his gut. With that, the disgraced treasurer is dragged away, stripped of his position, and placed under investigation. Calix feels a moment of discomfort amidst the chaos he has unleashed but consoles himself with the thought that his plans are finally moving forward. The remaining officials in the room tremble, their fear palpable, as they wonder if they will be next. As the tension thickens, the nobles begin to understand the broader implications of Russell's loyalty to Calix. The knight's allegiance has shifted entirely to the prince, signaling the effective end of the succession dispute. Calix calls for the head of security, who approaches nervously. Russell steps in and suspends the man from all duties, his tone firm and unyielding. The head of security has no choice but to accept, and the atmosphere in the room grows even more strained. Suddenly, a man seated in the corner rises, apologizing profusely for his failures. He requests to be dismissed from his position, but Calix recognizes him as Garrett, one of Russell's most trusted allies. Russell immediately rejects the resignation, declaring that it will not be accepted. With a touch of sarcasm, he comments that those who wish to work are turned away, while those who refuse to work must be made to stay. The remaining officials scramble to compile a list of individuals involved in the treachery. Garrett is tasked with overseeing their removal. Calix approaches him, instructing him to exempt 4 members of the finance department from investigation. However, they will need to find replacements for many others. Garrett advises caution, suggesting that too many dismissals at once could destabilize operations. Calix challenges this, questioning whether prioritizing functionality over justice is wise. He argues that leniency will not be seen as kindness but as a weakness to exploit. Garrett concedes reluctantly, noting how much Calix has changed. The once naive boy is now unflinching and resolute. The room takes note of the power dynamic. Russell's strength and Garrett's intellect now firmly aligned with Calix. Together, they solidify the prince's control. Calix smiles faintly, sensing the county is nearly his. A sudden flash of blue light catches his attention as the system interface opens. Declaring it time to leverage his talents further, he begins analyzing everyone in the room. With an unsettling grin, he identifies individuals with ties to opposing factions or questionable loyalties. Each is silently marked for removal. The tension rises as the nobles sense his scrutiny. Desperate to save themselves, some rush forward, showering him with exaggerated praise and declarations of loyalty. Calix dismisses them coolly, stating there will be time for discussions later. Russell watches from the sidelines, still struggling to comprehend how events spiraled to this point. Later, in his chambers, Calix collapses onto his bed, utterly drained from the day's political maneuvering. He reflects on his past life, where he was unremarkable in every aspect. Average in studies, appearance, and prospects. Nothing had been particularly bad, but nothing had ever stood out either. His memories drift to the day he discovered Heroes of Destiny, and the thrill he felt at the idea of achieving something no one else could. He recalls the moment he completed the game, receiving the message that he was the first human to acquire the seed of the gods. In that moment, he had wished to be reborn in the continent of Ellen, longing to feel extraordinary. Now, sitting on his bed, he realizes his wish was granted. The game's narrative of being born insignificant, enduring hardship, and becoming a hero to ascend the throne now mirrors his reality. Calix wonders if conquering this world once again will grant him another wish. Resolving to see this through, he drifts into sleep, vowing to rise even higher. The next morning, Calix wakes refreshed and considers his next move. He knows key locations from the game but lacks a true understanding of Shaekin's current state. Checking the system's map, he is ecstatic to find it fully unlocked, a reward for completing the game previously. The map reveals not only known locations but hidden ruins, dungeons, and secrets. This treasure trove of information, unavailable to other players, gives him a distinct advantage. He checks the imperial calendar and learns it is the year 289, 5 years before the events of Heroes of Destiny officially begin. This revelation sheds light on Shaekin's dire circumstances. By 294, the territory is destined to vanish. Russell's earlier mention of financial ruin now makes perfect sense. Reviewing Shaekin's financial records, Calix discovers that farm revenues are steady, and defense spending has not spiked. Yet the territory's debt continues to grow alarmingly. Hours of poring over documents reveal the root of the problem. The lucrative trade route with the Medrosa Desert has been severed. Another nation has established a rival route, drawing merchants away. Calix wonders how they financed such an ambitious project. To complicate matters, Shaekin's annual debts far exceed its income. Frustrated, Calix realizes that statistics alone cannot provide the full picture. An idea sparks. Remembering the imprisoned treasurer, Gidris, Calix decides to seek answers directly from the source. In the dungeons, the stench is overwhelming as Calix arrives at Gidris's cell. A guard comments on the prince's unexpected visit, nervously addressing him. Calix, knowing the guard's lack of authority, remarks that criminals and innocents alike deserve proper investigation. The guard agrees eagerly, showing his submission to Calix's growing power. Inside the cell, Gidris grumbles about the poor conditions but smirks when he sees Calix, claiming the prince owes him a favor. Calix denies this sharply, stating he owes the treasurer nothing and promises only to ensure his punishment is appropriately severe. Gidris counters confidently, pointing out his 20 years of experience managing Shaekin's finances. If Calix is here, it must be because he needs him. Annoyed by Gidris's smugness, Calix calls for a torture expert. The guard hesitates but complies after Calix snaps at him, leaving to summon help. Gidris, realizing the severity of the situation, falters. Calix smirks, remarking that the treasurer likely has little tolerance for pain. As the tension builds, Gidris begins to understand just how serious this young prince has become. Gidris immediately begins begging for mercy, insisting that he has valuable information that could benefit Shaekin. Calix, unimpressed, coldly orders him to start talking. Gidris explains that the territory's major debts are tied to a merchant named Gerard Mercies, who secretly manages a vault for the Hashiran family. He says the Hashirans use Gerard to evade royal taxes on their mining operations. Calix interrupts, asking why they don't simply report Gerard to the royal family, transfer the debt liability onto him, or sell the debt rights before arresting him. Gidris hesitates, clearly startled by the suggestion. He stammers that it's an incredible plan, one he had never considered. Before he can elaborate further, the guard returns, announcing that the territory's top torture expert has arrived. Calix's eyes light up, while Gidris's pleading grows more frantic. He blurts out that he knows the location of Gerard's secret vault, desperate to delay his punishment. The torturer, unimpressed, shoves Gidris to the ground, telling him to shut up. Gidris persists, shouting that he is the only one who knows the vault's location, thanks to his years in Shaekin's administration. Calix steps forward, placing his boot on Gidris's face, and commands him to speak. Gidris hesitates, stalling for time, but Calix's voice sharpens as he growls for him to continue. The torturer cracks his knuckles, suggesting they start with breaking fingers. Panicking, Gidris confesses that he once tried to rob the vault with the help of hired bandits. Calix immediately deduces that Gidris didn't act alone. Gidris confirms this, explaining that he paid the bandits in gold bars. When Calix demands to know how much, Gidris hesitantly admits it was 3,000. Calix freezes for a moment, incredulous, before bursting into laughter. The sound echoes through the dungeon, chilling everyone nearby. Calix composes himself and asks where Gidris got that amount, accusing him of embezzling funds from the treasury. Gidris bows his head, admitting that he took the money, claiming he had no choice. The temptation was too great, he says. He adds bitterly that his attempt failed due to a cursed magic crystal orb used to open the vault. Intrigued, Calix presses him for details. Gidris explains that duplicating the orb alone cost him 2,500 gold. Calix sighs, concluding that Gidris had been scammed. He accuses the bandits and Gerard Mercies of working together. Gidris shakes his head vehemently, insisting that he saw Gerard use the orb to open the vault. When Calix demands the vault's location, Gidris reveals that it is somewhere in the highlands of Gordon. Though blindfolded during his attempt, he is confident of the general area. Calix pauses, focusing on the map through his system interface. The room watches as he silently analyzes potential points of interest. Remembering Layla's comment about being trained in Gorda, he formulates a plan. Calix abruptly announces his departure, leaving Gidris shouting after him, desperate to know where he is going. The guard slams the cell door shut behind him. As they walk away, Calix's thoughts linger on the stolen 3,000 gold, suspecting the guard may have pocketed his share. His temper flares at the idea. Suddenly, Calix stops and calls for Shu, the guard accompanying him. Shu stiffens, nervously asking what the prince needs. Calix casually brings up the stolen gold, asking if Shu knows anything about it. Shu denies any knowledge, his voice trembling. Calix smirks, cryptically mentioning that Gidris had said something interesting earlier. Without elaborating, he walks away, leaving Shu sweating in fear. Once Calix is out of sight, Shu collapses to the ground, wailing that Gidris must have revealed everything. Furious, Shu bolts toward the dungeon, intent on confronting the treasurer. Meanwhile, Calix leans against a well outside, smirking at how easily Shu had crumbled under pressure. Calix is interrupted when a man approaches. By his attire, Calix recognizes him as a knight from the Order of the Blue Lion. The knight introduces himself as Krat Salim, explaining that Lord Russell assigned him to accompany the prince. Calix nods and discreetly activates his system to analyze Krat's stats. To his surprise, Krat is a senior knight, aged 26, ranked level 52, and classified as S rank. Calix is impressed, noting Krat's remarkable combat potential and wondering why he was absent from Heroes of Destiny. Calix suspects that Krat might have died early in the game's timeline, making him an overlooked asset. He muses that with Krat's power, he could have easily ranked among the top warriors in the game's world. Briefly, he considers a possible connection between Krat and the enigmatic messenger of death from the game. But Krat's cheerful demeanor and muscular build don't match the thin, sinister figure described. Setting the thought aside, Calix decides that having someone like Krat is an undeniable advantage. Snapping out of his analysis, Calix listens as Krat informs him of a merchant requesting an audience. The name Gerard Mercies immediately catches Calix's attention. The very man behind Shaekin's debts and the secret vault is now asking to meet. Calix's eyes narrow, and he allows a sly smile to form. Things are about to get very interesting. Calix strides confidently forward, gesturing for Krat to follow as they make their way through the castle's corridors. While observing Krat's slightly clumsy movements, Calix reassures himself that this knight couldn't possibly be the fabled messenger of death. Shortly afterward, they arrive at a meeting room. Calix steps inside, where Gerard stands waiting. The merchant places a hand on his chest and introduces himself as the head of a modest trading company. Calix greets him politely, acknowledging Gerard's reputation as a skilled businessman. He remarks that merchants of Gerard's talent are always welcome in Shaekin. Gerard bows deeply, expressing his gratitude for the prince's kind words. Wasting no time, Calix directly asks why someone as successful as Gerard would seek an audience with him, emphasizing that he currently holds no official position of authority. He adds that if this is a business matter, Count Russell manages territorial affairs. Gerard chuckles awkwardly and admits that while Count Russell is indeed in charge, the territory's future clearly belongs to Calix. He confidently declares that no one in Shaekin opposes the prince's decisions. Calix responds humbly, suggesting Gerard shouldn't overestimate him. He describes himself as merely one of two heirs, referencing the rivalry for succession. Krat interjects, laughing at Calix's modesty, and points out that everyone knows the succession has already been decided, even if it's not yet official. Gerard nods, agreeing with Krat, and apologizes if his words seemed presumptuous. Calix acknowledges Gerard's sharp instincts as a businessman, noting that survival in his trade requires access to critical information. However, Gerard privately observes that the prince doesn't match the rumors of a naive and foolish boy. Instead, the young man before him seems sharp, composed, and far more mature than expected. Trying to lighten the mood, Gerard compliments Calix's appearance, admitting that the rumors of his striking beauty were not exaggerated. His words take on an unsettling tone as he remarks that Calix is exactly his type. Calix immediately stands, cutting Gerard off with a firm voice. He declares he has no patience for wasted time and threatens to leave if Gerard doesn't get to the point. Flustered, Gerard apologizes profusely, realizing he must tread carefully. While charmed by the prince, he knows his priority is securing a business arrangement. Once seated again, Calix orders Gerard to speak directly. Gerard explains that his primary concern is the massive debt left by the previous count. Calix feigns ignorance, claiming to know nothing about such debts. He casually adds that the territory's former financial manager is already in prison for his crimes. Krat, standing nearby, winces at Calix's nonchalant behavior. Gerard, unfazed, smirks, recognizing that Calix is playing dumb. Gerard begins recounting the debt's origins with a sly smile. He explains that 5 years ago, the Shaekin territory entered into a 3-year contract, with repayment due in full at any time. He then announces that in 2 weeks, Shaekin must pay 60,000 gold coins. Krat freezes, visibly stunned by the figure, while Calix remains outwardly composed. Gerard assumes the prince is struggling to mask his fear and finds his stoicism amusing. Internally, Gerard envisions the despair he expects to see on the prince's face, picturing him breaking down in tears. Krat finally speaks, nervously suggesting Gerard consider postponing the payment. Gerard dismisses the idea, claiming his company has already shown great patience in waiting for recovery. Now, with Calix at the helm, Gerard expects prompt repayment as a sign of goodwill. Calix recognizes Gerard's polite tone as a thin veil for extortion. Rising from his seat, Calix remarks that Shaekin's annual revenue exceeds 6,000 gold coins, implying that securing a loan of 60,000 wouldn't be an issue. Krat appears confused, but Gerard forces a smile and expresses relief, pretending to be delighted by Calix's confidence. Before leaving, Gerard bows deeply, his thoughts turning dark. He imagines the day Calix will beg at his feet, perhaps even selling him into slavery. Once Gerard is gone, Krat blurts out his disbelief at the situation, asking how Calix can remain calm after hearing such an astronomical figure. Calix, already plotting his next move, knows the key lies in the secret vault in Gorda. The map in his system reveals ruins and treasures in the area, but the highlands are treacherous, filled with intelligent and dangerous creatures like the Ricegath. Outside the castle, Krat asks what Calix plans to do next. Calix smirks, stating that it's time to find someone who knows the region well, someone like Layla. Arriving at Layla's holding area, Calix compliments the guard stationed outside, requesting access to the prisoner. Krat chooses to wait elsewhere as Calix handles the matter alone. Inside, Calix finds Layla in a surprisingly clean and organized room. Layla greets him with her usual confidence, smirking as she asks if he likes what he sees. Krat, rejoining them, scolds her for speaking so casually to the prince. Layla ignores him, focusing on Calix. She confronts him about the poison he used on her, correctly identifying it as Cetus marionette. Calix praises her deduction, admitting she figured it out faster than expected. Taking a seat, Calix explains that he has a proposition for her. He warns that the moment she is released, she will be hunted down and killed. Layla seems confused, prompting Calix to elaborate. He reminds her of the animosity between the Shaekin and Hoshiran families, emphasizing her role in helping him expose their schemes. Layla quickly realizes the danger she's in. By testifying against the Hoshirans, she has made herself a target. Calix confirms her suspicions, explaining that without Grumbine's mana, the Hoshirans have no chance of conquering Shaekin. They will do whatever it takes to eliminate her as a loose end. Initially defiant, Layla lunges across the table, shouting in frustration. Krat immediately intervenes, slamming her against the wall and chastising her for her behavior. Calix calmly thanks Krat but asks him not to humiliate her further. He acknowledges that Layla's actions, while brash, ultimately helped secure his position. Returning to his offer, Calix tells Layla that if she agrees to work for him, he will provide her with protection. Misunderstanding his words, Layla accuses him of threatening her family. Calix looks exasperated, clarifying that if he wanted her dead, it would already be done. Layla, realizing her options are limited, reluctantly agrees to work for him. However, she insists on being treated as a mercenary rather than a subordinate. Calix smirks, amused by her pride, and accepts her terms. Shifting the conversation, Calix asks Layla about the Hoshiran family's training grounds in Gorda. He reveals his interest in exploring the region's ruins and begins piecing together a connection between the Hoshiran's wealth and illegal mining operations. Layla, intrigued, agrees to guide him through the highlands, marking the start of a dangerous expedition. Later that night, Calix gathers his team outside the castle. Russell expresses concern about taking someone as inexperienced as Krat on such a mission but ultimately supports Calix's decision. Addressing the soldiers, Russell reminds them of their duty to follow the young master faithfully. As the team descends into the tunnels beneath the castle, Krat leads the way, with Calix following close behind. Eventually, they emerge into an abandoned watermill, where supply horses await. Calix takes in the scene, preparing himself for the challenges ahead. The journey to Gorda is about to begin.